Hi, everyone. This is Chuck O'Neill, bringing you episode number 2 of the Florida Wildlife Advocates podcast. And today we're so overjoyed to have special guests with us. First off, we have the newly elected commissioner from District 5 in Orange County, Dr. Kelly Semrad. Hi, Kelly. How you doing?
Thanks for having me.
It's great for you to be here, and thank you for the honor of having you. This is probably your first podcast since you've been elected, right?
This is my first podcast ever.
Okay. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
We also have a former member of the 2024 Charter Review Commission, who is also an attorney, Rishi Bagga. Hey, Rishi.
How you doing, Chuck? Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, well, thank you for being on, Rishi. Rishi and I were fortunate enough to serve together on an important committee and on the Charter Review Commission, and we're going to hear more about what he did later. And then also in the studio today, we have Steve Meyers, a veteran of many campaigns of the Florida Bear, the lawsuit against the FWC, lawsuit against the city of Orlando to try and save the Princeton Oaks headwaters of the Little Wekiva River, a lawsuit against the FDEP to stop them from paving over 3.5 square miles of forested wetlands. What lawsuits am I leaving out, Steve?
Rights of nature.
Rights of nature. Steve has the scars of many many battles to protect Florida's wildlife, and we're happy to have him on. So these are our guests today, and the format of the I just want to reach out and say hi to Chris and hi to Shannon. I'm glad you're watching, and feel free to type in questions and let us know if you have questions or comments as we go along. So what we're going to do is the format of the show is we play some clips, recent clips of news reports, and then we're going to have a little discussion amongst us, and hopefully we'll learn something and maybe pass something along. So with that, Dean, you want to go to the first news clip?
Okay, here we go.
Another Florida panther was killed this month after being hit by a car near State Road 29 in Collier County. I'm Naples community correspondent Mahmoud Bennett. Florida Fish and Wildlife says this marks the 30th death of the endangered cat this year alone.
And a substantial majority of the known deaths are from vehicle strikes, vehicle collisions.
FWC says a 3.5-year-old male panther was hit and killed over the weekend on State Road 29 in Collier County. Just days earlier, another panther was killed on I-75 up in Lee County. That marks the 30th panther death in the region this year. Right now, traffic collisions account for about 75% of panther deaths in Southwest Florida.
Placing more people, more vehicles into some of these already deadly areas, we know that there are already roadkill hotspots existing, even in some of our more rural areas.
Amber Crooks is the senior environmental policy advisor for the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. She tells me this trend of more panther deaths coincides directly with the overdevelopment out east that her group has been working to dismantle.
So, for example, right now, the Conservancy of Southwest Florida is tracking and opposing 6 major projects in eastern Lee and eastern Collier County, all in panther habitat and within the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And with some of these projects, just 6 projects, there would be an additional 250,000 vehicle trips added to our roadways every day.
Wildlife experts say drivers can help by slowing down and following speed limits, especially at night in panther crossing areas. Reporting in Naples, Mahmoud Bennett, Fox 4 News.
Is unfortunately not the latest panther that was killed. There was another one after that. I think we're up to 33 panthers killed on the road so far this year. Dean, could you bring up that graphic that we had from last week. This is a little graphic I did for the bear meeting, in which I charted on the top, on that red line, the number of million miles a day that cars travel on Florida's roadways. And then the line below it, the black line, is the number of bear roadkills. So you see how they are correlated there, basically running parallel to each other. So whenever you have more miles being driven on a roadway in an area, in this case, for the sake of this, it's the state of Florida, but down in Southwest Florida, the more miles driven on the road, the more you're going to see these mortalities in Florida panthers. So what is the answer to this issue? And I think it goes back to what Kelly and Rishi have been working on as far as the rural boundary. If you can keep the concentration of people in a certain geographic area where they're not having to drive 20 miles to get into work and 20 miles to get back, that's the optimal way. So, Kelly, you've got two different hats here. One is you were an activist before you were a county commissioner, and then now that you're a county commissioner, you actually have a seat at the table, and you can cast these votes. Tell us, for those who are in these rural counties that are having these problems, like Collier County, how do you go about getting a rural boundary into the governance of that county?
So, well, first of all, I just want to say that clips like that regarding the panthers and the loss of a native species to Florida, and the fact that we don't provide for a habitat that's safe for them to exist anymore, I think it's disgusting. And actually, the rural boundary, like we've got one in Orange County, we've got one in Seminole County, and I think there's one other county that also has a rural boundary in Florida. But if we really want to be serious about leaving space for our bears, for our panthers, for our gopher tortoises, for the indigenous animals that are on critical protected species list as well as endangered list, looking at policy that saves land for them to live in their native habitat is absolutely critical. And one of the ways that we came up with to do that was the rural boundary. So the rural boundary draws a line between where urban growth ends and rural service area begins. And within that rural boundary, we would like to see a lot of our wildlife habitats and our corridors. But the process of which, in order to be able to get that in Orange County, what we did is we followed our charter process, which Chuck was on, Rishi was on, Steve Meyers has been very engaged with over the years. But that is where you have a citizen-led process to amend your county constitution. And in this instance, I submitted back in July of 2023 what was referred to as a proposal for a charter amendment. And the entire board, you submit it, it goes through the appropriate channels, it gets distributed out to all the members. And then they discuss it and they decide whether or not to advance it to a subcommittee to consider to put it onto the ballot. And that was kind of like the cherry on the sundae for a lot of environmental wildlife warriors in Orange County. But the legwork to get it there is literally, my goodness, like probably a good 20 years worth of work, and maybe even more. I've only lived in the area for 20 years and have always been very engaged. And not to say that there wasn't an effort before, it was just that the effort wasn't as critical because we weren't losing so many acres every single day to urban sprawl and developments that are being built and designed in places that have no business being built. So in terms of like how do citizens get this on, get a rural boundary moving, it starts with the uniting all of your citizen-based population, basically to stand up and say, hey, we're sick of overdevelopment and growth, and we want to be good stewards to our land. And then exploring the options that are available, because not every county in Florida is a charter county. So not every county has the ability for citizens to amend their county constitution, but there's always a way to create policy, and there's always a way to amend existing policy for change. So navigating those ways and finding people who are the constants, the attorneys who understand the language, the experts who can provide you with the data and the assessment, and then the people who have the time and the guts to really go toe to toe with elected officials and toss them out of office when they stop advocating for the things that you're interested in, and electing those people who are going to stand up and to protect wildlife.
Yeah, I think for us in Orange County, because Orange County is one of the 20 counties that are charter counties in the state of Florida, we have a leg up on trying to get things like a rural boundary. But there are 47 other counties that don't have that. And as you said, they have to work through a different process, perhaps an ordinance, and they may be able to do it by ordinance to create a rural boundary. We have seen recently, within the past couple of years, how Seminole County, who has had a rural boundary for a long time, their rural boundary was challenged by a developer, and it upheld, it withstood that challenge. So, it is a durable law that can be put into effect. Rishi, let me go to you and then to Steve. During that process, can you give us an indication of how warmly it was received by developers and by municipalities around the county?
Well, first of all, I'm really thankful to Dr. Commissioner Semrad, I should say now, whose leadership on this issue, I think bringing it up before our CRC was instrumental in making this a priority for us, and something that we discussed quite a bit. And in all candor, it's not something that I knew a whole lot about or understood as much until I really started to, to hear from citizens who were in favor of it. And I'll say, let me very quickly say, and I think it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, that a lot of the municipalities and a lot of the developers were against this, right?
No.
And they were against it right from the start. They fought us on it at every single level that they possibly could. But I think the more interesting story to me was who was for it. And why I say that is because this is one of those issues. And look, I've run for office. I think anybody who lives in Florida or in the United States knows we're in a fraught political era where people disagree on just about everything they possibly can. This was one of those unique issues that had, wide acceptance and advocates on, both sides of the political aisle. And I always found that really quite fascinating. I mean, we would go to, we went all around the county during the process of eliciting comments from citizens and as part of our Charter Review Commission. And so we would go to parts of the county that, were on the left and on the right. And, it may be for different reasons, but all of them found a need for instituting some sort of, I wouldn't even call this limitations, but real analysis, real, having all the information before decisions are made as to where development is taking place or where it's not taking place. And, I think that it's almost very easy to oversimplify this issue by saying, well, this is anti-development. And really, I don't see it that way. I've never have seen it this way. I see it as pro-development, but pro-smart development where we really think about and have all the information before we go ahead and greenlight development in our rural areas, in areas that are environmentally sensitive, in areas that are likely to impact wildlife. Or do we really think this through and see, is this a good idea long term? And so I think having a rural boundary and again, not a growth limitation, but some sort of measure that allows us to have all the information and make sure that our government leaders really think this through and make sure that citizens have the opportunity to give their input before greenlighting development in a lot of these areas.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned over the years from Steve is, routinely I feel like about once a day, someone is sending me a message about some horrible new development that's coming in some part of the state, and how do we stop it? How do we stop it? How do we stop it? And the thing I learned from Steve is what law are they violating? What ordinance are they violating? What charter amendment are they violating? And if they're not violating anything like that, then really there's no basis upon which to bring any kind of legal action. Could you explain that to us, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, you always have to have a legal basis for a cause of action. I remember back when they had the bear hunt in 2015, some of our fellow advocates were saying, well, can we sue the FWC for emotional distress for having to see the dead bears? I wish, but there's no cause of action for that. So anytime you want to try to stop a development or do anything under the law, you have to first find out what statutes, ordinances, federal laws exist that would give you a basis to do that, or common law. Now, one thing I would say, and you and I have talked about this for years, we probably don't feel all that great right now about our appellate courts protecting us, frankly, on environmental issues. And I don't want to discourage anybody, because I absolutely support and encourage anybody to file lawsuits to protect the environment. But you get other wins out of a lawsuit. You get a lot of publicity. You get it when you're talking about filing a lawsuit. You get it when the lawsuit's actually filed. You get it like we did in a bear hunt when there's actually a hearing, in that case on a motion to dismiss. Same with the rights of nature case, where you get a ton of good media out of a lawsuit, a lot of earned media, free earned media. So that can be a great weapon in the arsenal. And I'm not encouraging frivolous lawsuits, but it's a really powerful tool. And, beyond, I think you and I, Chuck, back when the bear hunt was going on and we had a lawsuit going on, we had people going to county commission meetings. We had people, I think, 15,000 petitions signed or more than that. Somebody flew a banner plane that said stop the bear hunt. There was the largest one-day animal rights protest in the history of the United States, I believe. And I think you coined the word bees. You use the expression, you got to attack it like bees. You have to hit these issues from every angle. And because you never know what's going to stick, what's going to work. So the starting point, to kind of wind this up with your question, the statute, is there one out there, and whether it exists, that's just the starting point. You can do a lot of other stuff off of that.
All right. Let's play the second clip, Dean, and then we're going to take a couple questions that have come in.
Much more than the national political landscape was decided last night. Orange County residents made their voices heard on a few important charter amendments as well. Amendment 9 passed with 73% of the vote, establishing a rural boundary and rural area, making it tougher to develop land within designated borders. Spectrum News 13's Devin Martin has this story.
On the day after the election, people are excited about Charter Amendment 9 passing.
And essentially what people did is they stood up and they said, we're not going to leave it up to elected officials any longer. We're going to take some of this power and put it in our own hands. And I am just so proud to be a part of that movement.
District 5 Commissioner-elect Kelly Semrad made handling growth a focal point of her campaign. She beat incumbent Steve Leary with 57% of the vote. She's also the vice chair of Save Orange County, a grassroots organization dedicated to fighting urban sprawl. She tells me now is the time to invest in areas that need it most.
We start looking at projects for revitalization. We start looking at a mass transit system that can work because we end the sprawl. And we start focusing on developing in a sustainable and smart way so that we can revitalize our community.
Overall, there will be special protection for certain unincorporated lands. This could be seen in East Orange County and areas west and north of Apopka. There will also now need to be a supermajority vote of the Orange County Board of County Commissioners to increase allowable density and intensity of development on these protected lands, or to remove a property from the rural boundary altogether.
We started looking at this back in 2023, and during the course of over a year of public hearings and discussions and speaking to experts and folks within the county, we became pretty clear that there was a need for a rural boundary.
Rishi Bagga served on the Charter Review Commission. The commission agreed to send this charter amendment to the Orange County Board of County Commissioners. Commissioners then agreed to put this on the ballot. Bagga is glad voters believe in this.
When we have growth, that it's smart and that the commission has all the information to make those sorts of decisions.
In Orange County, Devin Martin, Spectrum News.
Now, we did reach out to Orange County Mayor Jerry Dimmings for his reaction to the vote. His office told us, quote, "The people have spoken regarding more stringent policies to protect rural areas. I look forward to implementing the wishes of our electorate," end quote.
Thank you, Dean. That clip featured actually two of our guests here, Commissioner Semrad and Member Bagga. So that was a great day in the history of Orange County. I don't think we fully comprehend really how big that was, but. We had a couple questions, Dean. Do you want to read the questions, or should I read them?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and read them?
Okay. From the Sierra Club Calusa Group, says the FWC database shows at least 3 Panthers killed on the roads in the last couple of years north of the Caloosahatchee. That would be the Caloosahatchee River. That's a very high percentage of the total population up there. And that, you know, is anyone who's been following this issue knows the getting the Panther population to expand north of the Caloosahatchee River has been a goal of not only FWC, but Fish and Wildlife on a federal level. And for any of those who have swam across the river or kittens that have been born on the other side, I don't know if there are any yet that have been born on that side of the river, but to lose any of them is a real tragedy. So that's why I'm trying to tie these two concepts together. The dramatic increase in roadkills, not only in panthers, but also in black bears. With the right now we drive 655 million miles on Florida roads a day. And how do we get to a point where, you know, I hear the term wildlife corridor. Well, they need a habitat, not a corridor, right? We don't need a hallway, we need a house for them to live in. And to have a corridor that crosses one of these deadly roads is not going to do the population of wildlife any good. We need places where they can roam without crossing these roads, and when they do cross the roads, they're not subject to thousands of people driving back and forth to work every day from subdivisions that should never have been built. So, you know, without getting too far astray of this, Dr. Semrad, you know, the rural boundary amendment that you were a champion of, that you got to see come to fruition in the exact same election as which you came to power. What do you foresee now that it is law, now that it is part of the charter? What do you see in it being tested or being used for the the betterment of people and wildlife.
So first, I just want to go back to the comment where you say, I don't think that we've really solidified how big this win was for Orange County. And I just want to go back and just replay some of the events that took place to prevent it from getting on the ballot, and then what we can expect moving forward in terms of its implementation and protecting the boundary. So first, when we submitted it, I think that everybody thought it was like a pie in the sky. It wasn't going to happen. And so we had, it was really quite quiet, right, while it was going through the process. We didn't hear a lot out of the development industry until all of a sudden it was going to pass, and Tavistock, a massive developer in Orange County, along with several other local developers that were smaller, lobbied a senator who doesn't live in Orange County to change a bill that had bipartisan support by adding one sentence to the very end that made it basically illegal, changed state law for us as constituents, as citizens, to be able to put the rural boundary on the ballot by way of our Charter Review Commission. So they handcuffed the hands of the CRC, our Charter Review, and said that we could no longer do that. So the people had to go to the Board of County Commission, to the mayor and to the commissioners, and say, hey, our Charter Review Commission has agreed and believes that this is not only an environmental safeguard and protects our natural resources and our wildlife, but it's also critical for protection of our local economy, because we were driving such a huge deficit in irresponsible growth and development. So the Board of County Commissioners advanced it to our ballot. So when that didn't work for developers to change state law because the Board of County Commissioners still put it on the ballot, then they tried to sue the county to keep it off the ballot. When the judge ruled that they did not have a case, they tried to tamper with the supervisors of elections with the due date, moving it up until June from August. And the only reason we won that battle was because it would have impacted our local school tax as well, which would have had massive cry out from everybody who has a child in school or who cares about public education. And so when that didn't work, it did make it onto the ballot. And they came through with like this Hail Mary crazy thing where Tavistock went to the city of Orlando, to Mayor Buddy Dyer, and the 6 commissioners that sit on that, lobbied them and said, hey, annex all of the land outside of the rural boundary in the east and bring it into the city of Orlando, because then the rural boundary couldn't apply. And they were set to do it. The city of Orlando, Mayor Buddy Dyer, and all of the 6 commissioners that sit up there bashed Orange County, said we had no idea what we were doing, terrible things were said. And they were prepared on the eve of the election to hold an emergency meeting to annex all of the land out. And it wasn't until I think Orange County and Mayor Deming said, hey, if you're going to do that, then I'm going to pull out some really critical funding in tourist development tax money. And only then did we see that they pulled the deal off the table and it went through. So when we talk about how big this was, the people prevailed through some crazy ass nuts corruption that I would say a lot of other words, but this is going to be, aired. But we prevailed, and it was crazy to think that 500,000 people would have voted on a rural boundary, and a municipality within Orange County was going to do the bidding of special interest developers to annex St. John's River Basin, to build it out, which would have made the city 2/3 its size. That's crazy. And it's corruption at its finest. And I think we should continue to call those people out every day, because that's who they're serving, special interest. I also just want to say something about that tourism industry that we overlook in Florida, is that when we talk about protection of our wildlife and getting cars off the road to prevent vehicle deaths by our wildlife, There's a population that's a shadow population in Florida, and it's tourists. In Orange County alone, we get 75 million tourists, and they're accounted for nowhere in any of our models for traffic or for natural resource consumption. And I think it's really important that we recognize that while they may not live here permanently, tourists on a daily basis, we have hundreds of thousands of them here every single week. So it's important to recognize them, that they're driving cars as well. But I just want to talk about your question where you were referencing, like, how are we going to implement and how are we going to protect it? Right now, I'm demanding that not only is it recognized the rural boundary in our county constitution, our charter, but I am concerned that the state legislation is going to retroactively preempt us today on a rural boundary that was passed in November or at the end of this legislative cycle. So I'm insisting that the county will adopt the rural boundary into our comprehensive land use plan because I'm concerned that the state is still going to try to find a way to preempt it. I also am not totally convinced that my colleagues here now on the county commission understand that the rural boundary is a voter mandated protection of our rural lands, of the wildlife corridors, and of wildlife habitat, as well as an economic, it preserves our local economy. But in Seminole County, if a commissioner votes to remove land from the boundary or to build in the boundary, they will be thrown out of office. And I don't think that commissioners here understand that if you breach that boundary, 73% of the voters are coming after you, and we will throw you out of office, because that's what it's going to take. In District 5, the district I live in, we had Ted Edwards, who decided to cross the Econ with an urban sprawl and urban development. We had to sue. We won in court for urban sprawl. We threw him out of office. We elected Emily Bonilla. I mean, we have to make it abundantly clear that as an elected official, you're either going to choose to stand with the people and stand in front of the boundary to defend it, or the people are going to stamp you over and throw you out of office, because the voters have spoken, and it took us so many years to get here, so much effort, so much personal time, sacrifice of time away from your family, personal funds, people working 2 jobs, 3 jobs to try to fund lawsuits, working pro bono like Steve Meyers always does, like Chuck always does, like Rishi always does. I mean, it's really time for the voters then to coalesce themselves around the boundary and to hold any elected official who breaches it responsible, accountable, and to throw them out of office and make their life living hell while they remain in office until the next election.
Well, I think, Kelly, that's what people love about you most is you tell it like it is. You know, there are a lot of people who are too young to remember Howard Cosell, but that was his famous saying, "Tell it like it is," and you've done so. You know, one of the things that happened this week that I'm very excited about when you talk about throwing people out of office who don't listen to the public is Anna Eskamani announced that she's running for mayor of the city of Orlando. And as you and Rishi and Steve know, that Orlando has been one of the biggest problems because they annex land far, far away from where the downtown city is, and they cause added problems with infrastructure, driving, people coming back and forth all the time, Anna, in her initial statement, said, you know, she wants to end this continuous saga of sprawl from east to west of Orange County, and the city of Orlando has been the main perpetrator of that, and also destruction of wetlands. Yeah. But let's, Rishi, because you've worn so many hats, right? You've been on the Orange County Commission. You're part of the hospitality industry. You're an attorney, and you also have run for office. one thing that I really wanted to do with this particular podcast is to reach out to areas that are being affected by the sprawl, like Collier County. And, what advice would you give to them? Because that is not a county that has, I go out on a limb, they don't have Kelly Semrad on their county commission. They don't have a Nicole Wilson, right? They are kind of locked in a certain pattern of pro-development. So if you were in Collier County, what would you do to try and rein in sprawl?
Yeah, well, it's a wonderful question. I mean, look, I think first of all, I got to plead a little bit of ignorance as far as Collier County's specific charter, because I haven't had a chance to take a look at it. So I don't exactly know what the mechanism is within Collier, but I'd say there's a few interesting things that they could try to do. One of them, and it's something that I looked at a lot, even in advocating for the boundary here in Orange County, which was that there are a few of these boundaries in place throughout the state of Florida. And, Seminole is the one we brought up probably the most, just because it's, right next to Orange. But there are other counties within the state as well, including Sarasota County. And Sarasota having one is an interesting, analog, certainly not just for it being close to Collier, but in addition to that, just it being a county that's, this is not, lefty liberal county here, right? And I think that what that sort of describes, and what's so important about that example, is that it's incredibly important when advocating for something like this to have as many stakeholders as possible come to the table and talk about why it's important. I think one of the reasons why this was successful in Orange County is not only were we able to bring, and I'm not knocking, traditional environmental advocates, which is incredibly important work, but we had environmental advocates, but we also had folks from those rural areas. We had farmers who've been operating a farm in Orange County, families that have been farmers for a very long time. I had mentioned earlier, we had folks on, the right side of the political spectrum, the left side of this political spectrum, all talking about how this is incredibly important. So, as I think about this issue and putting a wildlife lens on it, it is no question, and that it is incredibly important we address this issue because of the sheer number of wildlife, deaths that the state is experiencing. Whether it's bears or panthers. But I think it's also important for us to have folks on the other side of this as well, meaning folks who can talk to the human cost of these sort of accidents, right? I mean, let's not forget that when we have wildlife that's killed on roadways, it has a tremendous impact on humans as well. There are human fatalities that occur because of these issues, and there are also is a tremendous economic cost, right? The amount of money that's spent on accidents, on that the government has to spend as well, fixing roadways afterwards, and all, the emergency response. So many different things that I think should make anyone concerned about this issue, even if they're not a wildlife advocate per se. Having the human advocates, the advocates who understand the economies of this, also being present in that room, I think are important, because having as many diverse voices really can help, I think, sell this sort of issue, and making sure that it's a real cross section of everyone who's interested in these issues.
Yeah, those are great points, and it is, as it was said a long time ago, it takes a village, right? So it really takes people from all walks of life. Now, one thing that I learned through the Charter Commission process and working with Eric Grimmer is that there is an importance with density of population. So, we repeated over and over again, look, we're not anti-growth, we're pro-smart development. And in order for mass transit to work, you have to get something like 7,000 people in a square mile for it to actually make sense. And that that means you have to confine the growth. You have to confine it into a certain space in which the mass transit makes sense and is financially feasible. So, Steve, in the legal sphere, and I know you've been a part of all these battles, and the rights of nature battle, and Kelly talked about the possibility of this rural boundary being preempted by the legislature. What is your thinking on that? What would happen if the Florida legislature tried to come back and retroactively preempt this charter amendment?
Well, I mean, they try to do it all the time. I mean, we've seen preemptions on plastic bags. We've seen preemptions on the size of cruise ships that go into Key West. We've seen preemptions on gun control. A very small percentage of pro-business groups in Tallahassee want to dictate top-down to what the local charter governments are doing. So I think Kelly is exactly right. I think it's a real concern, and I would expect that to happen. And I think her idea of getting the charter amendment incorporated into the comprehensive plan is a great idea and very important, and I hope efforts are underway to do that quickly. I don't think we should give up legally challenging state preemptions. I think there's still a handful of good arguments out there. And I also think if, charter review commissions, the county or municipal, are revising their charters, the more they can couch the language in terms of procedural issues versus substantive, the supermajority vote, for example, the better the chance they have of the charter provision surviving a preemption challenge in court. And I guess the final thing I want to say is, Kelly, it's always such a pleasure to listen to you. I got to tell you, I agree 100% about naming names. I went to law school with the Orlando mayor and went to high school with one of the city commissioners. And I've seen you, Kelly, just come up and speak at commission meetings. And I was going to give some kind of blasé, formal, little 2-minute speech to the commission, and I'm just like, to hell with that. You inspire me, and just unload on them from an emotional standpoint, because it's outrageous. It's outrageous that we have nearly every water body in Orange County is impaired under the state's own metrics, that the intercoastal waterway is dying. It may not even be biologically survivable or sustainable. 47% of all the water bodies in Florida are impaired. We've killed, in the last 50 years, we've killed 47% of the species that have been around for thousands, if not millions of years, some of them. So I hope everybody doesn't give up hope. You keep attacking, keep being creative, and the local government, I think, is incredibly powerful. What you and Chuck and Rishi did on the Charter Review Commission, and I just got to say this because I haven't been on the Charter Review Commission, but I've worked with Chuck, and I've seen how much time's involved, meeting after meeting for 2 years. These folks give up their time, and they have to, argue with each other and draft stuff and redraft it 100 times. But that's what it's going to take, and it's going to take it from every angle, because the big money developers have every advantage. We're the underdogs, and we've got to be tougher and more courageous and more imaginative.
Yeah, it wasn't 2 years, Steve. It was 1 month short of 2 years. Right, Rishi?
Yeah.
So he started in January.
I lost track. I'm not going to lie.
January of 2023 and finished up in November. Yeah, we were actually part of the charter review all the way up to the commission. So Rishi and I couldn't even talk about these issues, which is great that we can talk about it now that the election's over, because up until then it was people on our side, Steve, and I know you're gonna be surprised about this, but we were under the spotlight. So You know, whenever, for instance, Eugene and I would say the same word in a sentence, they'd be, those guys have been talking. Those guys have been talking to each other. So yeah, that was exciting.
And God
right?
bless Eugene Staccato. That guy spends more time working on local issues. He needs to be recognized. You know, he's a great guy, a great environmentalist.
He does. We're definitely going to have Eugene on here in an upcoming episode really soon. Shannon had a question. She said for Volusia County, for instance, and Rishi, I had asked you this about Collier County, but if you've got a county that's hostile to the idea of a rural boundary, it maybe Kelly, you have some wisdom on this. I mean, how do you turn it around when you have the commissioners on a county commission that are hostile to the idea of a rural boundary? Because a lot of them, let's face it, they're put in by developers, and a rural boundary is like, you know, a cross to a vampire, right? They just don't want to see that. Any of the three of you have any ideas for a place like Volusia County, how they would get this into their governance?
You know,
Go ahead.
I mean, Chuck, you have been every bit as part of the movement, and Steve as like basically environmental warriors of Orange County. It's not an easy path, and you know the thing is that somebody a long time ago told me, Kelly, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So you gotta be real. It's a marathon and not a sprint. And they also said this is a legal and political battle to get any type of environmental win. And what I learned in terms of flipping those who would have voted no into a yes is a lesson that I learned a long time ago. And that is that in order to get those no votes to support you from an environmental perspective, a wildlife perspective, you have to educate them on the economic value of something. And so, for example, our wetlands, what's the economic value of our wetlands? What's the economic value of a rural boundary? And once you start putting dollar signs behind potential policy changes, it's really difficult for a Volusia County commissioner to sit up there and say, this would save you. For example, in Orange County, we've got a $22 billion deficit in our infrastructure needs that they're proposing to raise citizen sales tax to help cover. And so it becomes really difficult that when you use the media in a very savvy way, you got to give them the media hook, but you start leaving breadcrumbs and you start talking about dollar signs, how is the person who's not an environmentalist yet an elected leader going to go to their constituents and say, yeah, that could save you money, but I'm going to approve this development anyways? That becomes a really hard thing to defend, is poor financial decisions. And so I learned very early on that, one, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So you got to you're going to lose some battles along the way, but you're going to win enough to keep you moving. It's a legal and it's a political fight. So if there's not a legal angle, like what Steve talked about, like what law has been broken, if there's not a legal angle, there is always a political angle through fiscal responsibility. And the simple fact is that developing in an irresponsible way costs every single person money. And that's where you got to provide the evidence, the financial data that says that's fine if you want to vote to put that in, but you just cost us this much money. You're going to cost us this much money in the future, and you are financially irresponsible, and you do not deserve to be sitting in that seat because you're supposed to be protecting my tax dollars. Those people start singing a real different song. And that was the angle that we had to take, because the rural boundary was not going to win if we left it at an environmental level. We had to make it about finances. And then we saw that 73% of the people sailed it through.
You know, Kelly, you've really set up our segment, our last segment here. Thank you for doing that. Dean, can you skip the third segment and go to the fourth news article?
Would that be Urban 3?
Yes.
All right, here you go.
I'm Joe Minicozy, and I'm the director of Urban 3 based in Asheville, North Carolina. We help cities look at land use, urban design, and economics so they can see how they're doing financially and what they can be doing better. What we consistently find is that municipalities and their counties perform better when they invest their dollars in walkable mixed-use development patterns instead of other forms of development like sprawl. Think of a company that consumes raw materials, adds some labor and know-how, and creates a product. This company will need to know the cost of their materials, their labor, revenue, and the ultimate market value of the product in order to see whether they will be successful or not. Cities are actually quite similar. Their raw material is a finite resource, the land within their borders, and their product is their tax base, which is what they need to survive and prosper. We have looked at cities all over the country, and when you do the math, it's easy to see that dense downtown development returns a greater investment to the community than putting tax dollars towards sprawl. Let's look at some examples. My house sits on 1/10 of an acre lot. Our municipal property taxes are about $1,100 a year, or about $11,000 an acre. This big box retailer sits on a 34-acre lot. Its total property taxes are a whopping $221,000 a year, which equates to about $6,500 an acre net to the city. Taking the city's portion of property taxes and adding the estimated retail taxes, it equals $54,000 in total tax production per acre. That seems like a lot until we compare it to a building downtown. This boarded up department store was converted into a mixed-use building site that includes retail, office, and residential space. So where does this mixed-use building come in? The city nets a considerable $330,000 in property taxes per acre. Add to it the estimated $83,000 in retail taxes per acre, which brings the total to the city to $413,000 per acre. That's more than 7.5 times the productivity of the big box site. Even looking at jobs, the big box store produces about 6 jobs per acre, while our mixed-use building comes in at 74 jobs per acre. And let's not forget the downtown building also contains 90 residential units per acre. Those residents are working and shopping and creating additional economic activity. The big box store has 0 residential units. But remember, most companies need to count more than raw material costs. They also need to account for their labor, management, and know-how. This is the investment they make in turning raw materials into finished product. Cities are the same. In order to turn land into tax base, they have to add a special something called infrastructure. At a minimum, cities add value to their land by providing streets, utility service, police protection, and fire protection. The more spread out a city becomes, the more expensive it is to deliver those services, especially when that acre of land pays less per acre. Unfortunately, when cities consider new developments, too often they focus on taxes that they hope will flow to the city coffers without adequately considering the land base they will use up or the costs they will incur. In city after city, big and small, when we do the math, it's clear that dense downtown development is much more productive than anything else in the community. Downtown development is the golden goose of urban economics, and it's the best bet for cities that want to prosper in the long run.
All right, that was a clip from Urban 3. And in 2013, there was something put into the comprehensive plan that the commissioners will have a fiscal sustainability tool available to them. And this is exactly what Kelly was talking about the people who are making these decisions need to know how to spend the land in the county, right? That's the way that they were putting it. And if you spend the land as being sprawl, you're not getting a good return on your investment at all. You're squandering your land. So this kind of goes back to Shannon's question. If you're in Volusia County, how do you get through to them? The first step, I think, is to get something like this into your charter, which Volusia County is a charter county, to be able to evaluate what the cost of these sprawling developments is. So, and Rishi, I know you were part of this committee, and we talked to the people from Urban 3. This was one of the other amendments that was put in the Orange County Charter this past election. What do you think? Where do you think this is going to head?
Yeah, look, I'm and Chuck, I'm thankful for you because you really spearheaded that part of it in particular. You know, I think I can't agree more with Commissioner Semrad on this, that putting the economic costs front and center is incredibly important, in particular in bringing some of those allies on board whom you may not necessarily think are going to be part of this. That's going to be a really interesting thing to see what happens. I mean, I will say one of the most interesting points that I heard out of that entire CRC process was from the planning folks for the county, who told us that they were basically projecting out the economics of any new development 5 years. And I think anybody who is, understands this or thinks this through realizes that 5 years is absolutely nothing, right? I mean, putting in a new road or a new pipe doesn't cost anything the first 5 years. It starts costing things 10, 15, 20 years down the line when that thing starts to break and you have to spend money to maintain it or to replace it. And so that was an incredibly important thing. I'm happy to see that this has now been passed. And so as a result of that, I think it was Amendment 4, it requires the county adopt a tool for that sort of analysis by October of 2025. So hopefully that's implemented. I know the county had started working on this even prior to this passing, because I think our attention on this issue sort of brought it front and center for a lot of the county staff. But again, when we're looking at the economics and you're trying to bring in allies into these fights who are, maybe not wildlife advocates or environmental advocates, but they're certainly budget hawks. Explaining this issue to them, that the county is spending money and they don't know if they're going to get it back, or they're going to make that money back, and they're not looking far enough into the future. I think it can be a really powerful tool in making that argument to them.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And the Sierra Calusa group talked about Kathleen Pasadomo and how instrumental she was in funding more purchases of conservation easements and things like that. So this is it's going full circle back to the it takes a village kind of thing, and this isn't one party versus another party, and how you have to bring in, Kelly, these different disparate groups to line up behind one particular thing. Now, Steve, when you have something like this fiscal sustainability tool, and I want you to rewind your life a little bit and go back to, for instance, the lawsuit over the 3.5 square miles, where we sued the FDEP over issuing the wetlands permit. If you had something like this at that point in time that showed it's squandering the county's money, would that have helped that case?
I think it could have, because judges are human beings, and you never know what catches the attention of a judge, and so you may be confined to the statute, or in this case, the charter amendment, the right to clean water. But at the same time, in argument, if you're arguing these points, which, by the way, almost none of those I had ever thought about or heard, they're fascinating, you can reframe the issue that way, depending on your audience. And I think I completely agree with Rishi. I think, gosh, I don't know if the public is more motivated to preserve our nature, because I think they're incredibly motivated to do that, or with the economic issue, but they're both powerful. So yeah, it could be a great factor.
Because our time's just about up, I'm going to toss this over to Commissioner Semrad. From the standpoint of wildlife advocates, and now that you're sitting up on the dais, and you have people coming up to you at the podium, as you did, life in 3 minutes. What would your advice to be for advocates around the state on how to comment, what to say, how to approach these things? And as you well know, there are some people who are just scared to death to stand up for 3 minutes and speak, and have all the focus on them. What would be your suggestions?
So my suggestion, first, don't give up. There's like I said, there's going to be a lot of losses along the way, but there's wins too. But you need to have a support group. So when you guys go and you go before the BCC or the Board of County Commissioners, whoever you may be speaking before, you have to think that, one, have a prepared statement, but two, you're only going to get maybe 3 minutes, maybe sometimes 2 minutes. So make sure that you have your statement prepared, but make sure that you have worked with a group where you guys have statements that are building off of each other. So one is hitting from an environmental angle. One is hitting from an economics angle, like flooding and property insurance is going up. One is talking about a wildlife angle. One is talking about safety to kids crossing a road. You've got to slice it and dice it and get people to show up. And I'll tell you, you're always going to have people who come out and make emotional arguments, and they're great because they provide the candor that the media needs to make it be a story. But you got to have a core group that goes in with a solid 5 to 7 facts and just goes bam, bam, bam. This is how you negatively impact our community by approving this, and this is how you could positively impact us by not. So you have to present both sides, do the due diligence, but you stick with it, you win in the end. The people will win in the end. It just is making sure that we don't give up. We stick together. We all make a difference, and we make a bigger difference in numbers. So we got to find our support groups and rally the people to be sure to come out.
Yes, thank you so much, Commissioner Dr. Kelly Semrad, Rishi Bagga, member of the Charter Review Commission of 2024, and the multiple scarred Steve Meyers from his many battles on behalf of Florida's wildlife, going back to just as a tidbit for everyone who may not know the inside story. When I first announced that Speak Up Wekiwa was suing to try and stop the 2015 bear hunt, our attorney at the time was Christopher Bird, and Christopher Bird unfortunately succumbed to cancer, and we were pretty much left with a hole in our legal framework there to bring this case. And Steve sent in a donation, and he made the biggest mistake of anyone. He said, if there's ever anything I can do to help. And I'm like, well, Steve, actually, we have a hearing on Thursday in Tallahassee. Can you come up and handle that? And he did. He dropped everything and came up. So we've been friends ever since. So with that story, a war story from the past, I'd like to thank my guest today and hope that you tune in. We're going to do this every Thursday at 6 until I give out or Dean gives out or something happens. But hopefully it's been of value to you, and feel free. This is recorded. It'll be on Facebook, and please share it widely. So with that, thanks again for watching episode number 2 of Florida Wildlife Advocates, and we'll see you next week at 6.